Hey everybody, welcome to Goshen Prepping. Besides food and water, obviously there's so many things we could prep, and people try to prep everything. It gets actually mind-numbing or chaotic thinking about all the different things we need to prepare for. It's overwhelming at times. Now, in med school, one of the things that we were taught, which, for me it was like a huge light bulb, was don't look at the body, look at each individual organ system and specialize in that organ system, because usually you only have like one thing at a time you need to repair or fix. Like we have neurological, we have digestive, we have respiratory, etc. Prepping's the same way, by the way. Besides food and water, the typical adage, a gallon per person per day, or, stockpile lots of food. We can actually break down preparedness and prepping and all the different things that seems craziness into 10 categories. Let's go through those 10 categories. Number one is shelter. And I think we take this one for granted because you live in a house, your house has a roof, and when it rains, it doesn't come on your head. And I'm not even talking about bugging out. Obviously, bug out, you want to have shelter like a tent or learn to make your own shelter. But even in your house, if we're talking about a total collapse of society and now you're fending for yourself in your home that you're bugging in, that's still problematic because you know what? Your roof needs maintaining. You need to have some tar and shingles, etc. There's lots of long-term things you need to look at when it comes to shelter. People, and by the way, in survival situations, of course, everybody says food and water. Shelter should be your first thing you go for, because if you're exposed to the elements, big problem. So bugging in or bugging out, make sure you have your shelter aligned and prepared. Number two, heat. And this shouldn't be a big shocker for you, but understand if the electric grid is down, if we're talking about like an EMP, that's just one scenario, it's down for a couple of years. Most people are not going to have heat either. Your furnace depends on that. And even if you have a solar generator or a generator, well, unless you have it set up in your house to power that heat, you could be in trouble. Now, I always talk about in your house, see if you can get a wood stove installed. Maybe you even don't have the woods outside, but maybe a pellet stove, something. Even if you have like a propane buddy heater or a kerosene burner, which we have sometimes, or which we have in our house too, we love them. Those are good alternate means. But understand that if we're talking about very, very, very long term, that could be problematic. So even just having a really good sleeping bag for your area and a tent, we're not talking about for outside, we're talking about in your house, like in your living room, it will basically mean life or death. You can easily survive and keep warm inside your sleeping bag and inside your tent, inside your house. So you really need to think about heat alone as being a standalone. Even if you live in Florida or a warm part of the world, you do have to be worried about heat at least sometimes of the year. Number three, security. Security for your house, security for your family, and security for you. For your house first, there's all kinds of things you can do. You can do motion detectors. You could do possibly tripwires. You can do, literally just a string with cans works pretty well if it's strategically placed. For you as a person, obviously you want to be able to have self-defense and protection too. Self-defense, maybe you actually take like Krav Maga or martial arts, or you learn how to use a weapon. Of course, I'm not going to narrow it down to one type of weapon. Be able to become fluent in all kinds of weapons. You need to be able to protect yourself, because understand when crap hits the fan, people get hungry. They get hangry. The term they get really angry. They get violent, because understand that a person will look at you and say, "Why is it you have food, but my family doesn't?" And they'll do what they can to try to take that food. So you need to be able to have protection for you, for your house, and for your entire family. 4, medical. And if you haven't done so, take like a first aid class or even an EMT course. Those are really good courses. They're really not as long as you think they are, but they're very thorough in covering practically all the medical emergencies you may possibly come across when it comes to crap hitting the fan. Not to mention, obviously, you should have medical supplies. Down in the description below, I have a link to our website, and in there in the store we have it so you could buy, like, for example, what we call a medical checklist for $2. It's pretty inconsequential as far as money goes, and it lists all the possible things you might want to stockpile as far as medical supplies goes. But obviously, take into account prescription medications, or if you try to switch to herbals. Medical is a huge thing. And I find, again, even just itself and being medical can be overwhelming. But you know what? One step at a time, start buying the things you need so you're ready. Number 5, tools. Having a decent set of tools is essential. I'm not even talking about anything really spectacular, just the basic tools from a socket set, hammer, screwdriver, wrenches, etc. And if you're not the kind of person who's good at fixing things, then I would buy some repair manuals to put in your library. But if we're talking about a total collapse, especially, you better get used to it. or make sure your neighbor who next door to you, you can give them food to come fix things in your house. But having a really good set of tools could be life or death also. Now, something else to add to that tool list should include probably things like saws and axes and hatchets and everything you need to be able to possibly chop down trees to have wood to heat your home and to cook food. But huge list on itself also. Make sure you have the tools. Number 6, power. Now, there's lots of people say we don't need to have power. And in reality, you probably could get by without having electricity. We went for thousands of years of mankind without power, obviously. But things have changed now for the fact that there's so many more people and we want to be more efficient. And you don't have to have power to get a deer and butcher it and cook that deer up. But having power for certain things that were, makes life a little bit easier could be an essential task, just for the simple fact that after you butcher that deer, are you going to be able to preserve it and salt it, smoke it? A freezer works really well. And having some kind of power source, although we have a generator that runs our whole house in case we lose power, at least have a solar generator. I'm not saying you have to have the big one to power your house, especially for the fact that gas and propane may disappear, but having a solar generator, at least enough to run a freezer to keep things in refrigeration. I'll tell you, even when third world countries in our modern time, the difference in a society of having at least refrigeration and without is a huge difference as far as survival and disease and everything else. Be able to keep things refrigerated and frozen is a huge, huge thing. And having solar generators, like I always recommend a Bluetti. I'll put a link below for Bluetti and some of this other stuff we talked about too, by the way. I'll put below in case you're looking for possibly the best ways to get these things. But even if you don't have a freezer, having a small solar generator, at least having some lights on at night, obviously is advantageous to be able to just get some things done. And we talk about things like flashlights and stuff, which we'll talk about in the next category, but are you going to have batteries? Because batteries do die. But having some kind of rechargeable stuff when it comes to power and solar is definitely advantageous. So number 7, lights. So like I said, having a solar generator with some kind of lights in your house is really good because although I love flashlights, finding the USB powered ones that you plug in can get expensive. If you simply just have regular lights or even some type of holiday lights you put up, if they're white, plug it into your solar generator, and they don't really use a lot of power, and your solar generator can make it so at least at night you do have some lights, which really helps out quite a bit. Something else that we have are those crank flashlights, and a whole bunch of them, by the way. We have some of the different shake ones or squeeze ones, which work well too, but have something that you can actually have light at night without even having to have a solar generator and carry flashlights around. You'd be amazed when it's completely dark. You don't really have to have a very bright one either. In fact, having a really bright flashlight sometimes is not the best. It'll give your position away. Number 8, communication. Today we depend on the cell phone, don't we? And if we're looking at a complete grid collapse, the cell phone, you may be able to charge your cell phone with a solar generator, but it's not going to connect to anything. All of the lines will either be completely down or jammed to you, so that way first responders can actually get through, or cops, etc. You're not going to be part of that list. So at least have a crank radio. Again, I'll put a link below for one, to be able to, not even just have communication to find out what's going on, but even just have some music. It really calms people down and relaxes you and puts a little bit of normalcy into that chaotic situation. But if you really want to talk about true communication, walkie-talkies obviously, or a CB, and you'll often find walkie-talkies are on one of the channels for CBs, but you could even step it up and probably go with a ham radio. I would say shortwave, but shortwave needs a pretty decent antenna to get anything going with that. So having a ham radio would work really well. But again, we go all the way back to power now. You need to have some kind of solar generator or something to power those devices. Number 9, documents. And I would make a binder or a list of every type of document you may need. Even if we're talking about just a quick evacuation, you want to be able to contact like the power companies, your gas company, but even credit cards. Obviously, documentation, everything you can think of for your family, vital records, etc., marriage certificates, social security numbers, all that stuff. Again, we're talking about for total collapse, we may never need our social security number again. But having all that stuff in one place is really good. And especially if you put it into like a waterproof, fireproof bag. Some of those work well. They're not really meant for completely like a home burning, being 1,000 degrees, super hot. I don't know how hot a home gets when it comes to burning, but the bags are not foolproof. I need to know that. But they're really good to be able to put everything in one location and throw it in your bug out bag if you need to. And even having some pictures in there as far as documentation goes too. Now, I have another checklist for this as well in the description below. You can look at our website. But I'll tell you right now, On the website, if you just go and buy the entire preparedness pack for $12, it includes everything. So you don't need to buy like an individual one. So that's the first one listed, by the way. $12 has all kinds of list of checklists, especially when it comes to documentation of documents you want to keep. Keep ready in case you need to bug out, or at least if something happens, you have all that stuff put together in one location. Number 10, sanitation. This could be a huge problem in the city, by the way. Be prepared, because water goes down. You're not going to have water to your apartment building, for example, but the sewage is going to back up because they don't have the things to process it and pump it. And so having sewage start spilling in the streets in a situation like this is actually a very, very real and scary possibility. At your house, if you have like a leach field, more than likely it's going to keep going for quite a while. So you may have dodged that bullet. But obviously you can go back to old school days of like digging out a latrine or digging out an outhouse if you need to. But either way, you need to process that sanitation, because I don't know if you know it, when it comes to feces, human feces is some of the worst on the planet. I know there's a lot of people who have like a compost toilet putting sawdust on it. Personally, I don't touch the stuff for the fact that the human feces, the bacteria in there, literally could be lethal if basically it passes right back into your food supply somehow. So there you go. There's 10 things we're looking at when it comes to crap hitting the fan. Break everything down and understand that we do have food and water, a gallon a day, maybe get a 55-gallon drum, et cetera, and food, stockpile a lot of food. But besides that, I find that people get confused or overwhelmed by the amount of things that we could possibly stockpile. And I hope this video breaks it down for you. And if you're like me and you have everything organized in a 3-ring binder, break it out with sections of these 10 different things and start making checklists. See if you're deficient in a certain area. Maybe you're doing very well in one area, but you need to focus on others. It'll help you understand what you need to do to be prepared for all contingencies. But you know what? I'm sure some things I didn't think about, you thought about. Put them in the comments below. I'd like to see that. Or even more so, what are the things that you're really good at? Like maybe you're a mechanic in the tool area. I got that covered. Put it in the comments below. I'd like to see this and get a communication going, because as far as being a community, it's all about helping each other out. And if you have a community who one person's a doctor, another's a mechanic, the list goes on and on, it makes everything much easier. But you still should not neglect you having all these things sorted out yourself and stockpile it away. Thanks for watching.